Hello, and welcome to this month's webinar from the IEA Clean Coal Centre. My name is Debo Adams, and I'm Communications Manager here. Our webinars are based on our technical reports, which are available from our website, www.iea-coal.org. Residents of member countries and employees of sponsoring organisations can download our reports at no charge after a one-off registration. Please visit our website for details. Today's webinar is on coal prospects in Southern Africa and is presented by my colleague Paul Baruya. Paul's report on this subject should be available on the website in December. If you have any questions to ask Paul as his presentation proceeds, please use the Ask a Question box at the top of your screen. Add your email address as well so that Paul can send you a fuller answer if we run out of time. Okay, over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Debo, and good afternoon. In this webinar, as Debo said, we're discussing the coal prospects in Southern Africa. This is presented in conjunction with the forthcoming report that Debo mentioned of the same name, which is co-authored with John Castles. Now, the first slide. South Africa is a well-researched country and is well known as the region's leading energy economy and one of the world's foremost coal exporters. But there are other countries emerging in the region, such as Mozambique, Botswana, Zambia and Zimbabwe, where coal production is emerging quickly from a very low base. And it's these other countries that we're going to focus on. Now, we do discuss South Africa as a major power trading partner or as a provider of infrastructure for exports. And we also mention Namibia, which is also discussed as a potential country that can facilitate coal exports, even though its own coal resources are currently very limited. So we'll look at the prospects of coal production, demand and trade in these emerging economies, which we'll touch upon in this webinar, but is provided in greater detail in the accompanying reports. Now, firstly, let's just have a quick overview of primary energy in this region. Shown here, it's the kilotons of coal equivalents for primary energy demand for 2011 for each major economic sector: industry, transport, residential, commercial and agricultural sectors. But firstly, what I'd like you to do is to cast your eye to the dominance of biomass usage in the residential sector in all these countries, shown here as a blue column, which clearly stands out. Which accounts for almost all the energy used in some of these countries. The red column indicates oil products in the road transport sector, chiefly the markets in Botswana, while electricity is used across the region and is shown in orange. And it's also used in the various economic sectors. Biomass demand, however, illustrates perfectly how wood fuel and wood-based products form a crucial and important role for tasks such as cooking, heating and lighting, and subsistence is therefore a central plank for the current energy market. Coal does feature in limited quantities in Botswana and Zimbabwe, where industry uses coal for cement manufacture and heat raising in food and agricultural processes such as tobacco. And increasingly we're seeing more coal being used in power generation, as we shall discuss later. Firstly, let's look at the countries as they stand alone and look at Mozambique. The country has a low per capita GDP, but GDP is growing at one of the highest rates in the world, alongside with low inflation. The economy is reliant on commodities, chiefly aluminium, which is a large percentage of the country's exports. To date, there's been little coal demand, but investment activity in recent years has greatly boosted the country's prospects and providing a potentially exciting future. The capital of Mozambique is Maputo, located in the far south of the country, close to where the famous Maputo Export Coal Terminal is located, also known as the Matola Export Coal Terminal, and has long been a serving port for the South African coal export industry. Maputo has a capacity of just 6 million tonnes, but there are expansion plans underway to boost this to more than 25 million tonnes. Looking to the mining sector in Mozambique, the key developments include new coal exploration and mine operations by some of the world's largest mine corporations, not least Vale and Rio Tinto. Other smaller concessions include Talbot Nippon, Jindal Steel and Beacon Hill. BHP is also active in the aluminium sector, and Eni and Statoil of Italy and Norway are also stakeholders in the offshore gas sector, demonstrating a fairly good level of confidence in the Mozambique energy sector, at least until recently. So where is the coal found? Here's a map of Mozambique, and I've circled the main coal regions in yellow, pardon me, and the key rail routes to the ports are red arrows, which I shall discuss in a moment. The main coal fields are located in the northeast of the country, northwest of the country, I should say, in the province of Tete, and here the production potential has been estimated to be as high as 100 million tonnes per year. The country's reserves is roughly 1 gigatons, but is potentially much higher, as further exploration will probably prove fruitful. The quality of the coal found in Mozambique is generally very good, with 70% of the known reserves being of coking quality, which commands a price premium over steam coal in the seaborne markets. These coals are readily mined from fairly thick seams and open cast mines, and so therefore should be very competitive in the world market. The main mines are operated by 3 private foreign companies, but there are more being established. Almost all the coal mines have associated investments to build new coal-fired power stations, but the real thrust is the production for the international seaborne traded market. Mozambique is perfectly located for access to the Indian and the Far East and Pacific markets, with a long coastline and numerous port facilities. These port facilities are currently capable of carrying a throughput of 13 million tonnes per year from the main ports Maputo or Matola, Beira and Nacala. All are being or could be upgraded to handle a great deal more coal with better rail, storage and handling facilities. The mines and ports are connected by rail, the shortest of which is the Seno rail link between Tete and the port of Beira. Rail is a third of the cost of transporting coal by truck, at least on a per tonne basis, and the barge prospects have been delivered a blow since barging down the Zambezi River was refused permission by the government, forcing Rio Tinto to seek rail options. In addition, recent activities by armed groups of the opposition parties have also disrupted plans for exports too. Proposals to transport coal to the northern port of Nacala are being mooted, one option of which uses rail routes through Malawi, requiring 2 separate border crossings, which may complicate auditing of coal slightly. Or we could avoid Malawi altogether by using a more lengthy route, and also requires a great deal more rail investment too. Elsewhere, there are also other plans being considered to use the ports of Chind and Mkuzi as well. Currently, all of Mozambique's electricity comes from a fleet of hydro stations, producing roughly 16 to 17 terawatt-hours. Consumption, however, is considerably less, at closer to 12 to 13 terawatt-hours. So therefore, Mozambique is a net exporter of electricity, its main trading partner being South Africa's Eskom, via the South African Power Pool exchange system. As more mines facilities develop, more electricity generating capacity is needed to help drive the mine facilities and associated industries and commerce. Yet only 11% of households have access to electricity, hence the high level of biomass use that we saw in the earlier slides. Consequently, Mozambique's generating capacity has been geared mainly towards supplying heavy industry and the Southern African Power Pool. We've mentioned that Mozambique is dominated by hydropower. The largest station is the Cahora Bassa station, as shown here, which stands at 2,040 megawatts of total capacity. And it supplies the state utility EDM and exports power to Eskom and Zimbabwe's state utility ZESA. Electricity demand growth in Mozambique has been high, matching GDP. New plans to exploit local fuel supplies by building coal-fired capacity could initially add 1,200 megawatts in coming years. This would create a great deal more diversity in the generating market, which is currently dominated by hydro, but also provides Mozambique and indeed the entire southern African region with more of a buffer when hydro plants suffer from low rainfall, which they do periodically. In the near term, coal production could reach 10 million tonnes per year. The long-term vision for the Mozambique coal business is an export industry capable of shifting almost 60 million tonnes per year by 2020, actually reaching levels that South Africa were exporting just a few years ago. The key products for exports will be good quality coking coal aimed at markets in India, China, Japan and the rest of the Far East. The new coal power projects will use low-grade byproduct fuel supplied from coal washeries as well as steam coal located close to the coking coal deposits. Other areas of interest for the future may include coal to liquids and fluidized bed combustion technology, but these are currently at the feasibility stage. Now moving on to Botswana. Botswana is another country with ambitions to boost coal production and coal demand, but it does face some rather challenging issues with regards to exports. The country is landlocked, so cooperation and partnership with its neighbours in export infrastructure projects will be necessary. Botswana is a dry country as it's prone to low annual rainfall, and so the hydroelectric potential is much lower than some of its southern African neighbours. So few options are open to Botswana other than fossil fuels and some renewable energies such as solar. Like much of the region, the mining industry is crucial for economic growth, with the diamond industry being most prominent, accounting for 76% of export values. The diamond industry is also the driving force for some of the key coal-associated developments in the country. The areas of coal activity are shown in yellow, circled here, mainly at Morapule and also developing at Sese in the eastern part of the country. Reserves have been identified in several locations across this eastern region of Botswana, but they're all at the moment at the exploration stage and early stages of mine development. The country's coal resource is considered to be immense at more than 200 gigatons, but economically recoverable reserves are likely to be much smaller, but how much is not known with any certainty. Current coal production is carried out by the Botswana Diamond Company, which runs the Morapule colliery with an output of 1 million tonnes per year. Most of this supplies the Morapule A power plant that is also owned and operated by Botswana. Morapule is an underground mine with thick seams and extracted using room and pillar methods, and also exploits continuous mining techniques. Interestingly, in the past, Morapule A was the country's only coal-fired plant, which served as the bulk of the nation's generating capacity, as we see in this slide shown in blue. The new Morapule B station pushes coal-fired capacity to more than 700 megawatts, maintaining coal as the leading source of domestically produced power, working alongside some gas oil-fueled plants. The coal-fired plants are also critical plants, all of which use ESP for particulate control, where local coals have ash contents of up to 20%, typically before the coals have been cleaned. Due to the shortage of water in the country for cooling, that means that they've had to equip themselves with air-cooled condensers. This new expansion project of Morapule B also gives rise to an increase in demand for coal at the Morapule colliery, so investment there has been boosted and production could exceed 3 million tonnes per year in coming years. Further Morapule expansion plans could add more power and mine capacity to serve the expanding local power market, as well as seaborne traded opportunities. Elsewhere, Sese Coal and Power, owned by Africa Energy Resources, has identified coal resources close to Francistown, a rail transit terminal for coal near the north of the country. This will also include a power project where currently the government has invited tenders for developers to apply. Botswana's geography does not lend itself to exports directly without the assistance of its neighbouring countries and partnerships with various infrastructure companies. Its coal reserves are located close to the rail facilities and the Botswana border, but distances to potential export ports are considerable, either via Mozambique or via the proposed route to Namibia. Although Namibia is showing promise, the Atlantic coal market may not support the demand for Botswanan coal. The best long-term potential is with coking coal exports and exports to the Indian Pacific markets. Other options include rail links with South Africa, where the South African Waterberg reserves in the Limpopo province share the same coal fields as the Mamabula coal operations in Botswana. These coal fields could be linked by rail, opening up a variety of local market and export options. Exports via Zimbabwe are also possible. Botswana already exports copper via such rail routes and imports diesel through Zimbabwe, so these issues would not be insurmountable. So the prospect for coal demand domestically from power projects is quite good. In the past, Botswana's demand for electricity far outweighed its ability to generate power from the Morapule A plant. Consequently, 90% of the country's electricity came from imports, chiefly South Africa. With demand and supply gaps opening up across the entire region, this level of import dependence is unsustainable. South Africa has already stated to Botswana that they're unable to fulfill long-term commitments to supply electricity, hence the programme to develop Morapule coal and power projects. Continuing growth in power demands from the mining, industrial and other sectors means the supply-demand gap will continue to grow. At the same time, without the adequate supply of electricity, economic growth could stutter. Other coal-related avenues might include the potentially vast coalbed methane reserves stored within the pores and fissures of coalfields and surrounding rock, but these are currently under investigation. Now we move on to Zimbabwe, another landlocked country with access to the coast via Mozambique by rail. The population is quite well served, with 40% of the population having access to electricity, but clearly there's plenty of room for improvement. Coal is relatively widespread, but reserves are not as abundant as elsewhere. Current reserves are measured at just 500 million tonnes, but some suggest that they could be 10 gigatons, which would greatly enhance the coal prospects. The quality of the coal is generally very good. Annual production is roughly 2 to 3 million tonnes, which is carried out by numerous privately owned coal companies, the single largest being the Hwange Colliery Company. Restructuring of the coal industry is underway, with indigenous black-owned companies to own 51% of the country's mining assets, which is to be funded by the government. Most of the production comes from the Hwange open-cast colliery, roughly 2 million tonnes per year output, although other producers include Makomo and Sengwe, which each produce just roughly less than 1 million tonnes per year of steam coal. Hwange is a coal mining town and supplies the local power station with a run of mine-quality coal. The power station is absolutely critical to the country as it provides up to 40% of the country's power needs of domestic production. However, the station was built into the 1980s along with 3 other small coal-fired stations, and a lack of maintenance has meant the station operates with relatively low reliability, and as a result, the availability in some parts of the year has been as low as 100 megawatts, a fraction of its full 900 megawatt potential. In common with the rest of southern African regions, Zimbabwe struggles to balance electricity demand with supplies. As you can see here, it's a graph showing the power generating capacity in Zimbabwe, and coal forms a very large proportion of this, at least of the plans to boost the nation's power generating capabilities along with hydroelectric plants. Privately funded IPPs are part of the programme of expansion, such as the proposed 2.4 gigawatt Sengwe plant, which will also use coal from the associated Sengwe colliery. Now, the impact of the programmes will give rise to a boost of coal demand and domestic mining by as much as 6 million tonnes per year if the projects are successfully financed and commissioned. Finally, Zambia. This major commodity and key to economic wealth comes from copper mining and exports. Copper accounts for 75% of the country's foreign exchange earnings, and more than half the demand for electricity in the entire country comes from the copper industry. Zambia's domestic coal prospects don't appear particularly good due to the very limited reserve base. Production occurs at just 2 privately owned mines, one of which was owned and operated by a Chinese consortium but has since been taken over by the state, but each produce 1 million tonnes per year. The main market for Zambian coal includes local industries which also buy coal from Zimbabwe in the form of products which are railed in, often derived as byproducts from washery plants in Zimbabwe and in the form of fines. Zambia is in a similar position to Mozambique with the dominance of hydroelectric power, but greater diversity into fossil fuels and solar-based renewables is clearly needed. The coal market will be boosted by the commissioning of a new 300 megawatt CFBC plant located close to the Mamba colliery. Most of the power will be supplied to the state utility ZESCO and ultimately will no doubt supply the copper industry and local grid needs. The Mamba CFBC will use local low-grade coals, which are high in ash, and products are obtained from the washery and preparation plants from the Mamba colliery. And finally, To conclude, in the 4 countries, Mozambique, Botswana, Zimbabwe and Zambia, coal prospects are in their varying states of infancy. While coal resources in the country have been well documented, economically mineable reserves requires a great deal more surveying and measurements before accurate volumes of extractable coal can be recorded on a national basis. Some coal subregions have been well surveyed, particularly in Mozambique, where foreign corporations have established themselves in the mining sector. Coal production in Mozambique and Botswana have the potential to be important exporters, complementing exports from South Africa. Economic growth and increased interest in coal-fired power is being spearheaded by the metals and mineral industries such as copper, diamonds and aluminium, which themselves command a large proportion of the country's GDP. Coal and coal-fired power is therefore linked directly to the wealth of this region. Some of the early movers into the various coal industries are privately owned and/or foreign companies. The main incentive is the growth in demand for internationally traded coal, and most southern African countries are well positioned to provide coking coal into this market, although for now Mozambique appears to be the best sited to exploit this opportunity. Namibia offers a coal port, perhaps for coking coal to the Atlantic market, but the future for steam coal in this market looks less certain. For this reason, Mozambique could well become an exports hub for southern African nations, while South Africa still has a massive role to play as an energy partner in the Southern African power pool, and also offering rail infrastructure and expertise to countries like Botswana to access Mozambique ports via the Northern Waterberg and Limpopo rail network. Coal mine expansions are almost always associated with coal-fired power projects, as well as these rail infrastructure investments. So therefore, Southern Africa is experiencing a massive boom in the entire coal supply to end-user chain in coming years. Other considerations, such as the wider electrification of the region's people, greater distribution of the mineral wealth amongst local businesses and commerce, and the provision of health, homes and education as a result, must also be part of the overall package. Clearly, this is a region which requires a great deal more ongoing research and will no doubt be revisited in the future. Well, thank you very much for listening. You can provide questions and feedback on this webinar via the website, and the next webinar will be on Wednesday, the 11th of December, by Jing Zhang, who will present her work on the management of coal combustion waste. I shall now return to Debo. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul, for a really interesting presentation. I'm now going to see what questions have come in and give Paul a moment to answer them. Okay, the first question, Paul, for you is, what about coal in Tanzania?
I'm afraid the report didn't cover Tanzania, and that's not an area that I've looked at all. But you raised an interesting question, and I think clearly there's some research that needs to be done in that area. So apologies for that.
Another question has come in about another country. Somebody wants to know why South Africa was not discussed in detail.
South Africa was actually, we covered a report in the last couple of years by Steve Mills, and that's available freely on our website, which will cover all the issues regarding coal prospects in South Africa and the clean coal prospects.
Okay, Paul, and then there's another question. How do you see the future use of coal in Southern Africa? Do you think it will mostly be exported or used domestically?
I think the clear drive for investment is exports, and in fact it links to the previous questions why South Africa wasn't discussed. A lot of the investment interest is in Mozambique and some of it's in Botswana, and I think coking coal exports is the key driver for the next sort of near to medium term, and that's driving the rail infrastructure investments. And separately, of course, the minerals and metals industry is driving the need for more coal-fired power. But in the near term, it's going to be exports. But in the longer term, it will be obviously a drift towards coal-fired power in the domestic markets.
Thank you. So if the emphasis is on exports for now, then you don't see that the prospects for coal will be changed much by the World Bank and the EBRD now announcing that they're reluctant to invest in new coal-fired power plants.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a shortage of funds. So they seem to be getting money from either Chinese banks, and I've even seen the name Rothschild and Sons as one of the financiers for one of the coal-fired power projects. So clearly, the World Bank and did you say the ABD? Or the EBRD hasn't created a major dent, but clearly it will affect some projects.
Thank you. Now another question has come in. Paul, do you think the infrastructure will support coal development in Southern Africa in the near term?
Yes, most definitely. I think the maps, particularly for Mozambique, showed that due to the location, it needs to get the coal to its nearest ports, and that does require a boost in rail infrastructure. In fact, I think worldwide, most commentators on the world international traded markets would say that inland rail infrastructure is probably the number one concern to get coal from out of the ground to the markets.
Thank you. Okay, that seems to be the end of the questions for now. So I'd like to thank Paul very much for a really interesting presentation. And hang on, there's one more coming. Sorry, Paul. I think the future of coal in the region is mainly dependent on the future of South Africa's coal. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I think it depends on whether the other Southern Africa, Mozambique and Botswana, they complement South Africa's coal exports or not. I think because production is shifting from the Witbank to the Waterberg towards the northern Limpopo province, it's so close to the Botswana border. I think, yes, developments in the Waterberg region, and particularly the rail investments and the rail plans by Transnet, will be crucial for at least countries like Botswana to get their coal out via that northern province and to the Maputo port in Mozambique. I think the South African coal ambitions, to reach something like 92 million tonnes in the next few years, and all the black empowerment mines looking to get a piece of the pie will definitely determine whether that region prospers. Whether it's in competition with Mozambique and Botswana, I'm afraid it's too early to tell at the moment.
Great, there's been an interesting discussion. Thank you, Paul. Right, we're going to close now, and I would just like to remind you that next month's webinar is on Wednesday, the 11th of December at midday UK time, and our colleague Xing Zhang will be presenting on the management of coal combustion waste. Thank you. If you have any more questions, of course, do email Paul, Baruya, or his co-author, John Kessels. Thank you.